So some topics I leave specifically for late at night. Some topics really are the kind of discussion you want to have late at night. So for this one, I want you to realize that it is being recorded at pretty much 2:30 in the morning. Late at night. Late at night. You can probably guess what I've been doing my time. And so, why am I doing this late at night? Well, I've attempted to record this about 4 times. The reason I'm doing a late at night one is it's a discursive one. It's what makes an admiral but not a captain. It's a patron question. It's a patron premiere, and it's one of those topics which has been percolating around Patreon for quite a while before it finally got voted up. It's been touched on a bit. What makes an admiral but not a captain? I'm not sure how long this video is going to be. I have recorded one which was full of examples and this and that, but honestly, it was 28 slides long, and it didn't feel like it was helpful at all. You see, I started to realise very quickly on that whilst I have a range of examples in my head and a range of resources to draw from in my head when I'm listening to me talk about this topic, whilst there are hopefully a fair number who are watching this channel who already know about this topic, the fact is it's a leadership video, and the vast majority of people who are watching it might well not have any of those examples behind them. And so when I reference those things, it might just add confusion to it. And realistically, it is a leadership management question. Because the difference between the two is not just scale, but also complexity. And to understand that, you need to look at the levels below it. And the reasons for those levels below. And the leadership blocks and the management blocks which build into these things. And so I've come up with this video. And this video has 6 slides. 6. Plus a front slide, plus of course a Shameless book plug, and a slide of upcoming videos. So 9 in total. And that seemed more appropriate somehow. That seemed more what we should be considering, because this is about leadership. So this video might end up being 10 minutes long, it might end up being an hour long, I have no idea. I've got some points written there which I would like to make, but mostly I'm going to be trying to discuss it through for you. Discuss the various points, using the slides as starting off points, and using my notes as guides, but trying to make it so it flows naturally and doesn't sound like I'm trying to give the entire history of naval leadership and organization in a single video, because that was the weird thing. The 28 slide long video, when I listened to it through and was trying to edit it, it sounded both rushed and overly condensed. And yet it was about 5.5 hours long. It wasn't what it needed to be. Because it was trying to do something in one presentation, realistically, which I'm spending an entire year discussing. An entire year discussing, and I was trying to get it through in one presentation, and that didn't work. So there is an argument that what makes the difference between an admiral but not a captain, what makes the difference between the two, there is an argument for me to go, well, you tell me after you've watched the entire year of leadership videos. And it is, broadly speaking, what today's question is going to be. I'm going to hope you go and watch all the other videos. I've seen some interesting comments recently about some of the videos. There was even one on the Venetian one, where they couldn't understand the point of the video. And the point of video was that the context of the scenario can affect the leadership you can give. The way the Venetians were setting up their leadership meant that their leadership really couldn't do much leadership. They weren't in a position to. They didn't have the experience or the skills or the things to draw from always, because sometimes they'd pick really good leaders, and sometimes they wouldn't. And whilst, yes, that can happen in any system, in a system where it's elections to posts, that can be more problematic, because theoretically, even if you make mistakes about it, you're appointing someone in a authoritarian system to command based on their ability to command, not their ability to be popular. And those things can be very different. Think about your own experience at work, at school, in life, wherever you've been. Now, sometimes the really popular people have also been good leaders. But also often the most popular person isn't a good leader. And sometimes the people who get elected because they're friends of everyone and lovely are friends of everyone and lovely because they never say anything to anyone which might upset them. Which is great for having a friend and bonhomie in a group. It's terrible for a leadership position because they have to occasionally tell you when you're being stupid and to stop it. That's the job of a leader. There's also the scenario of, do they prioritize their friendships over doing their job? Again, that's the trouble of being a leader, being even a manager. Good leader, there are some tenets of good leadership which doesn't matter what level you're on, apply to you. The fact that having favourites is okay. That's fine. But having favourites you then give all the good jobs to and you overly protect because they're your favourites, that's when it's a problem. There are always going to be people you like more than others. That's part of human nature. Trying to pretend you won't have favourites, you won't have people you get on with better than others in any group in society, is you lying to yourself and lying to everyone else. The difficulty in terms of being a good leader, in terms of being a good manager, is separating that personal liking them from a professional liking them. I, again, have this discussion, as I often emphasize, my PhD is not history, it's war studies. I deal with a lot of current affairs. I've gone to a lot of interesting conferences over the years. I've met a lot of people who are in various positions in governments around the world. I might like that government, I might not. I might like its actions, I might not. It doesn't matter. I have to be a professional. I'm going to ask them questions. I'm going to interact with them. Shouting, screaming, I hate you and all you stand for, is not going to get me any information out of them and is not going to help me do the jobs I do. That's part of professionalism. It's understood, that one. Well, it's the same with leadership. Going, you're my friend, I love you, I'm going to give you all the best jobs. It's not good leadership, because I might love you, you might be my best friend, but you're really terrible at accounting, so I'm going to keep you nowhere near anything which involves a till, because frankly, I don't want us to go bankrupt. That is leadership. Being honest in your appraisal of your own skills and the skills of others. And so, this comes to the first thing. What makes a manager? And I always start off with a manager before a leader. Why? Because I think to be a good leader, you need to be a good manager. I think you do. But I don't think necessarily all managers are good leaders. In fact, I think very few are. And I think this is what makes a good manager, this should say. What makes a good manager. You can all think about your own management experience, managers, and wonder if they do have organizational skill. Now, that doesn't mean they necessarily have a tidy desk. Tidy desk is, you might think they keep, but they can be very busy, they can have lots of things. It's, do they have a tidy organization? Do they have a workflow that makes sense? And are they keeping that workflow? Are they taking in the workflow and managing it? Are they managing the organization? That is what organizational skill is. Are they able to prioritize? Can I look at a list of tasks and go, well, okay, according to this list of problems, we run out of fuel tomorrow for the generators, we run out of food next week, and we run out of water in the next 20 minutes. You then go, right then, you need to go to the supermarket and get some food. That's probably not the sensible priority right now. At that point, I'd say food is next week, but that's only probably if refrigeration keeps going, so it's power and water. Water you can survive a couple of hours without of. Energy, you won't survive too long without. So you need to fix those two first. Food, it's always worrying knowing you're going to run out of donuts, but you can live without them for a bit. Accessibility of subordinates and assign them to roles which suit their skills and aptitude. That goes back to the favourites thing. It's a very basic thing. Can you assess the ability of your subordinates? Honestly. Can you assess yourself honestly? That's usually the first thing. What makes a good person? As usually my answer to that question is someone who can assess themselves honestly. Who knows their strengths and their weaknesses. I have them. I will I'm honest. My strength tends to be in my ability to analyze and process large amounts of information. That's what makes me a good consultant on occasion and a good academic. My weakness. My weakness tends to be that because when I give my word, I will try my utmost under all circumstances to do something. I expect others, when they give their word, to do so as well. And I still have to learn that's not always the case. The trouble is, as I've got older, I'm selective over people who surround me, and I tend to select the ones who are my friends who are like me. Who will, if they give their word. The only reason they're not keeping their word is if there is a major family emergency or they're in the hospital. That's the rules. Sort of thing. World War III breaking out, those sort of reasons. It's fine, okay? You've got priorities that come up. I understand you can't make it to my birthday party. But the trouble is that's almost made it worse for me. Because now when I'm dealing with people, because I'm used to my friends being like that, and I'm like that, I have to remind myself when I'm dealing with people from organizations which I might be working with for the first time, that they don't necessarily have the same modus operandi. And I can't hold it against them. Because they might not place the same value in it. And they might do it as well as they can, or as soon as they can, or when they remember. I cannot hold that against them. But also then I have to watch myself, because then I can go too far the other way, where I'm basically forgiving them for being twits. And that's a weakness. And I know it's a weakness. So I have to try and balance that in myself. And I have to try and manage that in myself. And I'd say that's being a good person, is being able to understand your strengths and weaknesses. And I have others. I have lots of others. Trust me. We all do. We're all human. It's the wonderful thing about us. We are varieties. Every single one of us is many pieces of chocolate in a chocolate box. But once you have those skills, you can hopefully then start applying them to others around you, being honest about their skill sets. I have two fluffy research assistants, and you'll often see the poodle on camera. There is a reason why the poodle tends to be on camera rather than the corgi. The poodle, God love him, whilst he does sometimes jump up and ask for a biscuit and a poodle treat and these things, honestly, he usually sleeps most of the time when I'm recording, when I'm on camera. That's when he normally sleeps. He's very blasé about it, doesn't think about it at all. The corgi, when I'm talking away to the camera, thinks I'm having a conversation with him and likes to have a conversation back. And it's rather cute, but it's going to make giving a presentation very difficult. Now, I don't want him to stop doing that, and I don't mind him when I'm in here researching and I'm talking to myself or trying to explain something to myself. If he's talking back, it makes me feel like I'm less insane. But when I'm live, or when I'm actually recording, it's probably better to have the poodle in here. But they work well, both of them do. But again, it's understanding their strengths and weaknesses. It's working with your subordinates. And the final skill of a manager is the ability to problem solve. Now, believe it or not, problem solving comes back to your ability to prioritize, because most problems are made up of lots of little problems, and working out how to organize those little problems to actually solve the big problem and in what order you need to tackle them is a skill that you need as a manager. It is a skill you should have. If you don't have that skill, you're in trouble. Because your primary role as a manager, normally in day-to-day running of operations, is not the actual technical operating of things. It's this has gone wrong, can you solve this problem, a scenario of things? Or, this is important, and we need to make sure it is done absolutely correctly. Those are problems to solve. And that's a skill set. That comes down to your ability to prioritize. It also comes down to your ability to look at your subordinates and go, right then, you have the skill set for this to do this best, so I want you on this. Now, in your task, you were already assigned to that, so I need to move that onto someone who's skilled with that job, and I need to start moving those people around, and I need to reorganize my team. Because if I put if I put it just on that person, and I don't reorganize others around to cover their workload, then that'll just create another problem for me down the road. So that's bad management if I just go, there's a problem here, you're the best at this, here, deal this. And don't go, what workload are you already managing? Which I should already know. If I'm the manager, I've probably assigned that workload. And go, right then, okay, I want you to offload that to that person who's either just finished the task they were doing, or is skilled at that, and I can move one of their jobs to that person who's just finished the task they're doing and who's skilled at the job that they were doing, that they would have otherwise been doing. I need to know those abilities of my team. And again, please note, I'm giving you the sort of the ideal versions. This is a good manager. This is what a good manager should do. So, if you're going to comment below, I've never had a manager like that, well, you've sort of answered the point of, this is what a good manager should do. If you've never had a manager like that, then ask yourself, have you ever had a manager who you thought was good? If the answer to if both those questions is no, you've answered your own comment. And I don't mean that to be rude. I just know that there will be a lot of comments on like that. A lot of comments. And then we have what makes a leader. So I know I had the guy from The Office, Ricky Gervais from the British Office, for the manager because, well, it seemed appropriate. For leadership, I have Dr. Cox here. Now, Dr. Cox was the character from Scrubs. And why have I put him up there as what makes a leader? Because in many ways he was. And he was quite a good one. And he had personality flaws. And you see, one of the troubles you have today with the modern concept of a leadership, and that comes out, is you have it tied up a lot with politics. And politicians are often obsessed with projecting the image that they are perfect in every single way. And of course they're not, because they're human. And the fact that any of our political systems accept them projecting that and don't just go, but of course you're not. Grow up and just be honest with us. We don't care. If you're good at your job, that's fine. If you then veg out every night in front of the television and watch, I don't know, Three Men in a Boat every evening. By the way, it's look it up. It was a very random television program from a few years ago. It's what you want to do. That doesn't really bother me, sort of thing. But the trouble with the modern politics being the way it is, and that being quite a lot of the media, and then you've got the movies and a lot of TV series where the leader is often defined as this perfect person in so many ways, especially some of the more modern media. The moment a leader isn't perfect, they are complicated and coming from a dark past or these sort of issues, and you sit there and go, oh, you're going to be that version of a leader. Well, Cox was interesting because he was probably one of the more realistic ones we've had on television in the last few decades. And he was sarcastic, he was arrogant, and he was rude. Yet, he was also fairly good at the manager system. He was fairly good at making sure he had the right people, the right skill sets in the right jobs. He had the ability to inspire, to empathize, and he would get in the trenches with those that he is leading, those led, yet keep an understanding of what's going on beyond their vision. I.e., yes, I'm currently doing this in this section of the ward. I'm saving this patient, but I also have an idea what's going on over there and what's going on over there. And that's the thing, because a leadership, one of the differences that makes between a leader and a manager is putting everything in the wider context around them. Often people will tell me when they're talking about leaders and they're talking about great leaders, they'll say, well, they always seem to know a step ahead, be a step ahead of what the problem's going to be and be able to fix it and project it. And often being a step ahead, all that it requires is understanding what's going on around you, seeing the wider context of the situation. It's not complicated, but it is difficult. Because it means you have to be able to almost split your focus. Be able to be focused and totally in the moment where you are, instructing the personnel you're with, inspiring them, leading them, managing them. And at the same time, have another part of your brain focusing on everything else that's going on around you. The whole wider context outside of your little bit. And that is the hard thing to do. Trust me. I've spent years in management and leadership roles on various education and other things, and I would say it took me a while to get used to it. I would hope I'm a good leader. I don't think I'm a perfect one or a great one, but I would hope I'm a good leader by this point. But it took me time, it took me a lot of effort, and it took experience to grow into that. Being a manager is kind of easy. You can set up processes, you can keep, as long as you follow them, you can keep yourself appraised, you can have a fair metric for grading your employees and evaluating their skills, which takes out your personal biases. You can have all sorts of things in place to try and limit, where you can muck up your own management. But it takes effort on your part to turn from a manager into a leader, to actually be able to inspire people. Because different people require different types of inspiration. How you work with one character might be completely different than how you work with another character. One of the roles I really enjoy doing is working with A-level and GCSE revision of students. young kids, 16 to 18, and managing revision centres. I've principally done this through one company over the years. And I'm usually given a team of tutors, who are school teachers more often not, but sometimes the other university lecturers, and a team of course assistants, who are usually university students. They will all come from very different backgrounds. If I try the same methodology to motivate and inspire a 60-plus-year-old maths teacher as I do my 19-year-old geography student who's being my course assistant, I'm being an idiot, because those two are completely different personalities from the get-go. Again, it's something you have to learn as a leader. How to inspire different people, how to interact with them differently, how to work with them differently. And the same goes for navies. The same has always been true for navies. Experience with them has shown me, how does a good leader inspire people who are their NCOs, and how do they inspire their sailors? How do they work with their officers above them? And one of the things you realize very quickly is you can get to a certain rank in most of the armed forces by being a good manager. To get above them, you need to look like you're a good leader. And so you can have a scenario where you actually have good leaders below good managers. And the leaders sometimes have to lead up as well as lead down. And that's a very interesting position to watch. Because on paper, you have a straight chain of command, and you have this senior officer who has the more experience, is the senior rank, has had the training, and yet the person doing the leadership isn't them in the unit. The person setting the timbre, the atmosphere of the organization, the inspiration of the personnel, is not the person who's in charge of it, who on paper is the leader. And I've seen that a couple of times. And the way that situation can work out can be entirely depend on the qualities of the person who's in charge. You can have a Captain Sobel and Lieutenant Winters situation, although it was not as bad as, or not the same way as it described in the TV show. It was not like that. It was a very different relationship, but it was still very much a case where Winters was very much the leader of Easy Company, and Sobel was the manager who was above him. That's one of the more famous examples, although exasperated for TV, and yeah, definitely, it's very different in real life. But the history has shown us happens, and it's still around us today. And in whatever organization you go into, you will find us. If the manager goes, okay, I know this isn't my skill set, they have the accurate appraisal of skills and subordinates, and they realize they've got a good leader below them, they'll use them, they'll harness them. And by the way, that can see them get promoted even above the level manager. People the managing skill normally get promoted, because if they're good at harnessing junior leaders, then that's a skill. That is a skill set. Okay, yes, they might not go on to very senior command, but there is definitely a place for them, slightly more senior up in the organization, if they are recognized to be good at picking out junior leaders, harnessing their skills, and properly developing them. That's a skill set. That's someone who's going to be very capable of developing the character, the culture of your force. You might want to go along to Fleet Command. And if you consider, recently there was an Admiral I was talking about in a video who was like that, who did all sorts of roles in, heading Dartmouth, heading other positions, selection of admirals for senior posts. Very good at selecting senior leaders and very skilled leaders, but wasn't considered necessarily have the leadership skills to go on to higher command beyond the captaincy. normally beyond the captaincy. It did go beyond the captaincy, but not much higher. And there are reasons for this. Again, because this is the other thing you find in the armed forces, is some people might get senior ranks, but they don't get to go off and run things. They've been given that rank because it enables them to utilize their skills down below, or otherwise in the force structure. But they're not in that rank for senior leadership. They're in their rank so that they have seniority. There is a difference. So, what makes a leader? I said, they've got to understand what's going on around them. So then, what makes an officer? And why have I drawn a difference between being an officer and a leader? Well, the problem is, if you're in a scenario like most of the armed forces, you're going to have a lot of leadership and management skills and personnel with those skills around you. Those kinds of organizations tend to attract a lot of people who are naturally prone to leadership, to taking command in crisis situations, to organizing, to problem solving. So being an officer is different from being a manager and a leader, because a manager or leader might have a group where there's only 1 or 2 out of a dozen to 2 dozen personnel there who are actually contenders for their role in realistic terms, who are actually going to stand up and do the leadership and stuff. An officer in any armed forces probably has about a dozen. Might well have some senior NCOs as well. So they have to temper their leadership skill and their management skill and their ability to judge people's abilities with having the judgment of when to hand off to another leader because they need to be elsewhere. And the reason for them being elsewhere can be a mental need, i.e. they are coordinating so many different things, they can't be in that position and also keep an eye on all those jobs because of the complexity of the situation they're dealing with. So they have to hand the local control off to someone else and basically start doing it as a distributed management system. It can be a physical one, i.e. are they well enough? Have they been injured themselves? They can't afford to be a hero. They have to make sure there are good decisions being taken here, but also they might need to because of morale. So they have to make that judgment call, but also physical. They can't necessarily get to where that thing is happening. They might have to be physically somewhere else. And there's even the ability to. Now, the ability is an interesting one, because this is one of the more complicated ones to do, because most leaders have a desire to be leading from the front, have a desire to be involved in the process and decision-making and what's going on. And it's usually even more the case the younger you are as a leader. As you get older, and especially as the team you're leading gets larger, you have to get more used to the fact that you're going to have to be hands-off and you might have to be somewhere else. But in the complexity of battle space management, task management, especially with modern warship, but anything, lots of other situations you can think of, it might be a scenario where the officer has to think, well, I'm a good leader and I'm a good manager. I've got all these skills. But honestly, this task, I've got an NCO, I've got a Chief Petty Officer nearby me who's got 20 plus years experience, who's probably better for dealing with this than me. But if I'm here, he has to defer to me because I'm the officer. And that could be a problem. So I need to say, carry on, Chief, I've got to go deal with X. Now, when it's done properly, it's a very sensible thing to do. But when you do it too much, an officer gets a reputation for always handing over to others. You see, this is the problem. A lot of these things, if they're done appropriately, are signs of good leadership, good management, of being a good officer, knowing when to do this. When you do it too often, It's often a visible sign of bad leadership, of not being competent, not being capable of your task. And that's also another problem for training up leaders and officers, because it can look on paper like, well, you just said this is a good methodology to do under certain circumstances, but you just said if I do it too often, I'm going to look bad. What are you saying? Well, that's the judgment call. That's the judgment on you. That is the requirement. You have to make a judgment as an officer as to whether it's your leadership which you need to deploy at this position, or whether your leadership is better elsewhere and the other leaders are able to take over and should take over. And that's a tough call to make. That is. But you have to make it. And also you have to think about doing it, because the other problem is, if you're not there, you're not going to get the experience of leading in that sort of scenario, which could necessarily help you further your own career, but also be better prepared if a situation comes up similar again in the future, and you don't have the option of passing off to someone else. If you think about it, if it's an accident in peacetime, is it better to take charge of the damage control so you understand it better and more appropriate, or is it better to let a chief lead it and you go to the damage control board and sort things out from there? It's a tough question. It's something you have to answer in yourself, depending on the context of the situation. And that's the other dirty secret of leadership, management, all these things. It often boils down to who's prepared to step up and take the decisions. And take the responsibility for the decisions. I have had this discussion with more colleagues, especially in academia and education over the years, than I care to think about. The amount of times I've heard them complaining about their bosses, about the people, and I go, well, have you ever volunteered for a leadership role? No. I'm not saying you can't complain about it if you've never put yourself forward for it. We can all complain. But there is part of me which thinks if you've been doing a job for a dozen years, and you've never put yourself forward for a leadership role, and then you're judging the person who has put themselves forward on it for not having maybe enough experience in the role, or not understanding what they needs to be done, I'm sort of looking and go, well, you had the option. You could have put yourself forward. You haven't. You have to deal with it then. You've got a leader who doesn't fit your mental image of who should be leading you, and you've had the opportunity to do it, yeah. And if you're in an organisation which just doesn't promote internally or always picks their friends because they've got bad managers, then why are you still there? That's not a healthy situation to be in. That's I'm going to be actively looking for other employment situation. With that being said, shameless book plug time. So, shameless book plug, the point where I say thank you to you for supporting this channel, for liking, sharing and subscribing. But it's also where I offer a couple of other things. I shamelessly plug my book. Yay, because no one else is going to do. More books are coming soon, but computer issues are holding that up. Computer issues will be sorted soon. As soon as I actually get paid this month. Contract work is always fun. This is why I'm moving more and more to becoming my own contractor. We'll leave that to one side. I will be getting the new parts for the PC to basically repair. Well, it needs to replace its motherboard, power supply unit, CPU, RAM. Of course, the cooler for the CPU cooler, and I've added in a couple of new fans and a new case because, well, the case was busted and the new case has space for a lot more fans, so that's going to help it hopefully avoid other issues in the future. So, yeah, all seems sensible to go with. But yeah, that all costs a lot of money, and it's thanks to you I've been able to do it, put it together as quickly as I have, because literally the computer's gone broke a couple of weeks ago, and thanks to you, I've got most of the money. Add in my paychecks, which hopefully come in on time, and I'll be able to afford it happily, and it'll go in, and yeah, all thanks to you. Thanks to you to support this channel. And the only thing I want to add into this channel is if you like these videos, when you sort of do subscribe, look at the bell next to the subscribe button. And this goes for all the people who watch videos on YouTube, for all the content creators out there. It doesn't matter what they are, it doesn't matter who they are, okay? If you really want to help them, what matters to them is how many people watch the videos within the first hour, really, the golden hour, and especially the platinum 5 minutes of when they go live. And if you want to make sure you're told when a video is going live, you have to make sure you've not just pressed the subscribe button, you've made sure the bell clicked on it and made sure the bell is filled in, and make sure you've got notifications turned on your system. You have to do all those things, because that's what really helps us with our videos and grow their circulation. It's how many people, when they first go live, click, oh, I'd like to see that. Oh, I'd like to watch that. It's how many people tune in for a premiere, how many people tune in for these things. All that really does matter. So thank you to the people who do. Thank you for the people who do make some of my videos go up to the tens, well, a few have gone into the tens of thousands, which I'm pretty darn happy with. Honestly, as a university lecturer, it's always nice when I see them going up north of a couple of thousand, but once they get into the tens of thousands, I'm going, hello! So thank you. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you find it interesting. And as I said, this is my book which is currently out. More are coming. Now, I will say this, for the examples of Captain and Admiral I'm going to be discussing in this video, I have chosen British ones. And before you think that, well, of course you're British, so of course you choose British ones, I actually have a reason for it. If I choose ones who are, let's say, American, or French, or German, or Russian, and I am rude about them in any way, shape, or form, it turns into a whole Britain versus them sort of thing, and no one's listening to the critique of their leadership capabilities. But if I pick a British officer, and I'm rude about them, then no one's going to get into that, and hopefully the British people listening will go, yeah, we understand why you chose a British officer for this. And so, yeah. Okay? That's it explained in a nutshell. The reason I have gone for British officers for my examples, like Captain Johnny Walker here, when I'm talking about captains, literally because I can be rude about them. Because Walker is a good captain. He's good at leading a group of his escorts and hunting down submarines. He really is a skilled one at that. Would I want him in charge of a fleet, though? No. The honest answer is probably not. Oh, he'd get Rear Admiral. He definitely deserves Rear Admiral, and probably a large a battle group and those sort of things he could probably deal with. But anything higher than Rear Admiral in this period, unlikely. Because as skilled as a captain he is, he's almost too skilled as a captain to be good for the higher command. Okay? Because as an officer moves through their career, they're supposed to be growing the skills to become a captain. And being a good captain requires the ability to be able to run multiple 3D chess games in their head simultaneously. They need to know where and how their ship is moving through, interacting with the operational space, and what their mission is. They need to be constantly thinking what an opponent might be doing to impede their ability to accomplish that mission. And then, finally, they need to be able to balance the needs of both crew and ship to get the best out of both. Believe it or not, you can become so skilled at doing those chess games in your head that you're not necessarily good for going on to higher command. Because you're going to end up doing what Admiral Beatty did. Admiral Beatty is a very good captain who goes on to become an admiral, and the more senior he gets as an admiral in charge of fleets, the more his problems start to highlight. Because he's so used to running one ship very, very well, that he's not so good when it comes to thinking into multiple ships, into expanding it. He's concentrating too much on the ship he's on. And that's the reality of what you're often dealing with as a captain. You need to be running those games in your head, those free chess games in your head, constantly. And they're 3D chess. They're not straight normal chess, they're 3D chess, multi-level. And you also have the problem that a loss or issue on one of those chessboards can cause problems quickly to appear on the other two. And so whilst those games are separate, they're also interconnected. Whilst they're all their own range of issues that you have been running, any one of them can upset the other two. And you are a leader of leaders. You're a manager of managers. You have a whole command structure below you you have to manage. And do you know what the other issue is as a captain when you have so many different leaders in a group? It's those leaders can be competing without even meaning to. They can be best of friends, but they can both be effective leaders and they can have a different vision, and you can have literally them splitting the crew with their difference of views. And you have to manage that. You have to lead that. You have to run that. If I use the chess game again, scenario. When you're a young player in chess, the thing you're often so keen on doing is getting that pawn to the end and getting another queen. And that's lovely. What happens if you get 2 pawns to the end, though? 3 pawns to the end? You end up with 4 queens, and whilst, yes, you're going to win the match, that's also a bit of a logistical issue to manage 4 queens on a chessboard. What are you going to do with them? You almost always end up leaving 2 just sitting there while you're manoeuvring 2 and just using 2 for the job. There's honestly a good argument that sometimes as you get older, instead of upgrading to a queen, you might ask if you could have a rook or a knight or something instead, because you can make use of something which is a different asset. But 4 queens? You don't need that much firepower on the chessboard. You're just going to leave them sitting there, honestly. You're going to leave at least a couple of them just not moving. And you can have that same problem as a captain on a ship. And that can cause issues. Because if you have leaders who are constantly, young leaders who you're developing, who are constantly having to be left to one side, doing nothing because you're using others, that's going to stultify their growth and their career. Or worse, they're going to start causing trouble because their natural leadership skills are going to feel not recognized, and people who don't feel recognized and don't feel valued tend to cause issues. They tend to not understand why they're not being used. In the best case scenario, they tend to think it's a problem with them, which can lead to them acting out in one way, and in the worst case scenario, they think it's a problem with you, in which case they're acting out in a completely different way. Either way, they're probably overthinking the situation in their heads when you want them to be in the situation they're in. Honestly, being a good captain, you are kind of like a pub landlord and psychologist. You are having to constantly evaluate your people around you and their abilities. But you're also having to, at the same time as you're doing that, try and imagine you're the enemy trying to stop you doing what you're doing. And by the way, that doesn't just happen in wartime, that also happens in peacetime. That's a constant for ships. There is a constant Cold War, a constant threat of Not necessarily violence, but impediment. There is a reason I use that phrase. There are so many ways you can impede someone from doing something. So many ways. You can get there first. That's always a good way of impeding them. You can prevent them getting there at all. You can disrupt their visit. You can do all sorts of fun things, and a captain needs to understand this because the captain has to think about diplomacy. A captain will have to interact with allies, with opponents, and will have to manage those relations. And that is often part of the mission set. And the captain will need to deal with all these things. It's a constant wear on them. This is one of those things of when I say, when you find someone who's a captain, who's able to juggle those things in their head, and who's doing it well enough, they've captain and they're continuing being captain, i.e. they've been promoted to bigger ships because they've been valued as doing it well. You're dealing with someone who's a very capable person. A very, very capable person. Which is why I have to say I do find it funny when you consider all this stuff is in your headspace. The amount of times I hear various things come about as to what should be a captain and what shouldn't be a captain, or who should be a captain and who shouldn't be a captain. Whilst there is always going to be the chance that people have performed well at every other level, and then get to a captain's rank and turn out not to be able to do it because it's such a difficult task, and that does happen because no organisation is perfect. If you've achieved captain or colonel, the odds are there's a lot of faith in your ability to do this. And one of the fun things is I've had this conversation with captains, and especially about this thing. This my free 3D get a chess games. And they've often looked at me and gone, no, we don't do that. Then I describe them and they're going, oh. Because the really good ones, they're doing this without even thinking about it. They don't imagine they are playing free 3D chess games in their head. They are doing it, they just don't realize it. To them, it's perfectly natural to be this way. And it's a really difficult assessment to make whether a good captain is born or created. And honestly, I think it's a bit of both. I think it honestly is a bit of both. Because if you're not born with the raw materials which give you a chance to be a good captain, you're never going to make it. You need to be fairly smart. You need to be capable of problem solving. And you need to have the capability, which is going to be developed young, to almost take yourself out of a situation while still being in it. Remember what I said about you having to divide your mind as a good leader? Well, for a captain, they've almost got to portion their brain off. They've got to constantly be thinking of how could the enemy take advantage of the situation. They've got to be constantly watching all their crew and their ship around them and evaluating what's going on. And they've got to be constantly thinking about their mission circumstance and what's going on around the ship, outside the ship. Because if they don't and things go wrong, the buck stops with them. And yes, they can rely on other officers. They have other officers apportioned to those tasks. But they're many ways the point where everything comes together. They are the monarch of the vessel. Everything comes to them. Everything comes to them at a certain point. And everything at a certain point has to base itself off their judgment, their trust, their belief, their opinion. And it's a tough job. It really is. And there is a reason, therefore, that naval officers spend their entire lives training to be this point. That is what your first 15, 20 years of your career are going to be entirely focused on training you to this point, training you to being a good captain, because A, that's the highest a good proportion of your officers will ever achieve, and B, that is the critical point a goodly proportion of your officers will achieve. But then what makes an admiral? What makes an admiral? And before we argue about what is the difference between the two, and especially consider the question of what makes an admiral but not a captain, we have to think about what makes an admiral. Now, being an admiral... well, being an admiral takes that role even higher. That role is taken even higher. This is a good one example. Admiral Henderson. He was the third Sea Lord in the run-up to World War II, and if he hadn't died when he did, he'd have probably gone on to other senior commands. Third Sea Lords often did. Admittedly, he'd been in post for quite a long time, but that's because he was very good at it. He's promoted to full admiral towards the end, and he would have gone off and served as a full admiral somewhere with the Royal Navy during World War II. I have no doubt he would have been given senior command, because he was very good at the core thing of being an admiral. And the core different thing for being an admiral? Well, you're not running one ship, you're running multiple ships. Captain thinks diplomacy, and admiral has to think in terms of policy, both foreign and domestic. They are not just picking leaders, they are picking leaders of leaders. They are trying to form a fleet. And the thing is, when we start thinking about multiple ships, you have to think it through, because the best position for your ship might not be the best position for that ship to be in a task group. That can seem like a strange point, because surely the best position for a ship is the best position for a ship, right? Well, not always. You see, I might want to have my air defense ships up threat from my carrier, from my core of my battle groups. I might want to have my destroyers, etc., spread out in that line. And I also want to have my ASW ships, my frigates, spread out in different positions to cover likely threat positions from the enemy. But the thing is, whilst they've got to cover likely threat positions of the enemy, is that the threat positions to those ships themselves, or the threat positions to the battle group? Those two things are rarely the same. The example I was giving again earlier of Beatty, and I'll bring him up again. He's a very good captain. If you look at how he positions his flagship often, and often how he runs battles, he's running the battles mainly for his flagship. He's running the battleships, the ships as it, the battle cruisers or the whatever ships he's with, as if they are an extension of it. They are his flag. It's his flagship which matters. His flagship is the key asset, and that isn't often the case. It's going to depend on the mission, but a carrier is a good example of this. A carrier is never the key asset in a naval battle. It's the key supporting asset. Its aircraft could be the key asset for strike or air defense, but itself, the carrier itself, the ship itself, isn't the key asset for the fight. It's the command and control node. It's supporting the aircraft, but it is not the key fighting unit itself. In many ways, it's a rather large, well-armed auxiliary, rather than necessarily a warship, in how it fights a battle. Or how it's supposed to fight a battle. I do realise HMS Formidable had different feelings on the subject, as did HMS Unicorn, but we'll leave the Royal Navy's armoured carriers and forward aviation support ship, which was honestly not a carrier, out of this to one side. Honestly, they're not. Which is one of the reasons why a lot of debate about them gets very, very silly. When you start looking at debate and you're going, well, hang on, you're talking about your carrier as if you want it to also be your air defense destroyer. And you don't want your carrier up threat. And you don't want anyone thinking it should be up threat. And honestly, if you're dealing with most modern politicians, if you do arm your carrier like it's an air defense destroyer, rather than giving you an extra air defense destroyer, they'll probably go, well, you therefore don't need as many air defense destroyers, do you, and cut them. And so that gives you a carrier which is its own air defense destroyer, which is not a good situation to be in, and less escorts. And I know in a sensible, logical world that wouldn't be the result, but we live in a world where leaders are supposed to be perfect, and yet we all know they're human, so they can't be perfect. So what makes you think the rest of the world's politics is sensible and logical? It's just not going to happen. So an admiral has to step outside themselves. They have to step beyond the ship they're on. They have to imagine the whole context. In many ways, they have to remove themselves almost entirely from what's going on around them. They almost have to ignore the ship they're on. They have to be able to ignore those years of training and almost exist entirely in the virtual space inside their mind, because the distance they're going to be dealing with, the problems they're going to be dealing with, they cannot visually identify. They cannot see them, as a rule. They're not going to be able to touch them. They have to entirely be able to deal with what's up here. After a lifetime, a career of being able to see stuff, touch stuff, work on stuff, that affect things, lead by example. They're going to have to be giving orders to rely on other leaders to deliver and lead by example. They are going to have to be moving pieces to intercede with other pieces and interact with other pieces they will never set eyes on, they will never see. They have to have, in other words, a very hefty amount of imagination. They have to be able to conceptualize a battle space which is not in just one plane, but is in multiple planes. Underwater, on the water, above the water, on land, at the same time. In cyberspace these days as well, and possibly happening in space as well, and in terms of the political battle you have waging on. They have to be able to deal with all of that. And they have to have a staff, and run a staff who are experts in those areas, and listen and assess what information they're being given. The learning task for being a captain is you've come up through your specialization, and then especially in the Royal Navy, you go off to become a warfare officer normally, and from that route you'll then go up to become a captain. You get the warfare qualification so you can fight the ship. There are other routes, but that's one of the more common ones. And the reality is that running a ship, as complicated as it is an extension of you. It's an extension of you as a person, as a leader, as an organizer, as a naval officer. It is an extension of you. And that's a good thing in many ways. That's a useful thing, because that means you can bring it in. You go, well, this is my arm. I don't really think about how I move it, but I move it. But I know it's my arm and I can see it moving. And you can go and interact with the personnel who are doing these things and who are specializing in these things, and you can get an understanding, and so you can know when to say good, well done, and not well done, and you can talk all the things through with them. But once you're an admiral, you're at a level above that. It's no longer an extension of you. And it's not puppets on a string. It's not an extension that way. Because you're now leading a force of captains, of ships which are all extensions of the personalities in charge of them, of the person in charge of them. And the scale of the complexity you're dealing with is so much greater. Because when we were talking about it before, I said it's how the ship interacts with the world around it, and how its mission might be affected by the enemy, and I talked through the 3 games of chess. Well, now you have, as an admiral, you have all your ships interacting with each other and running that, and how that as a cumulative whole interacts with the world, interacts with everything going on around it. And the more ships you add in, the more complicated it gets, the more evolutions you have. I once heard a senior naval officer describe high command, being an admiral in charge of a task group, as juggling a mixture of items of different shapes and sizes, and there's always an anvil looking to crush your foot. He actually went on and said the difference between being a good admiral and a bad admiral is when the anvil comes crashing down, whether you allow everything else to drop, or whether you manage to keep it all the rest still in the air while crying out with pain internally. Because as an admiral, you can never let them see you're flustered. Because their morale, their ability to do their job, depends on you being certainty, being stability, being a rock in a situation where everything else around them is falling apart. Human beings are funny creatures. They often talk about it with TV shows. If they want to do something extraordinary, they have to set it in the normal location with the normal cast. If they want to introduce different cast, they can't do it. They have to do normal jokes and a normal location. If they want to bring in a different location, they have to be using it's a normal storyline with the normal cast. You can only change one of those 3 things at once, and people don't get lost in the continuity of television. That's the old theory. And to be fair, it's not far wrong, it seems. Well, if you're dealing with a complex combat scenario and you're dealing with the morale of your personnel, their ship could be changing. They're under combat for the first time. They've got people around them who are all worrying. The constant is the leadership. And the person on the top of that leadership on most ships is going to be the captain. On some ships, it's going to be the admiral. And the admiral sets a timbre for the captains. Who do the captains look to for certainty when they're trying to inspire their crew? Lead their people. They're looking to the admiral. And so an admiral who cries out in pain every time an anvil comes crashing down on their foot is not doing their job. And the thing is, they might not even be the one who drops that anvil. It might be someone else who they were relying on to do their role, or it might just be the luck of the draw. They might do everything right, and they still might lose a ship, because they just get overwhelmed, or the enemy just gets lucky. Because that's the way the cookie crumbles. It is. That's the way the situation can go. So the difference between being an admiral but not a captain, what makes an admiral not a captain, is if 10% of your officers can make good captains. 1% will make good admirals. Because it is everything turned up to the max with more added in of being a captain. And you have to take yourself further away from commanding a single ship to concentrate on commanding a fleet. I've got Admiral Cunningham up here because he's a classic example. He is an admiral who makes the very real decision that he's got to command his fleet from ashore, because he doesn't have enough space and doesn't have the requisite facilities to realistically command the Mediterranean, all the complex operations he's got going on, from a capital ship. Even his beloved HMS Warspite, which he loves dearly. It's just not got the space he needs for it. That's hard. That's a hard decision to make. That truly is. And we put as much effort as we can into making the command space on carriers and modern ships that are supposed to be outfitted for flag officers with all the facilities they're going to need to support them. We really do. And yet, it's becoming more and more a case that the Admiral will be having to coordinate things, maybe from the other side of the globe with modern communications. That was certainly the case in the Falklands War. What's often forgotten is Sandy Woodward is often listed as being the task force commander. He wasn't. He was a task group commander. He was the carrier battle group commander, to be specific. The task force commander was a guy called Admiral Fieldhouse. Admiral John David Elliot Fieldhouse, who never left Britain. He commanded the entire war, the entire operation, from his headquarters, because he had to. The only place where he could get all the information about what was going on with Allies, what was going on with the Soviets, what was going on with the fleet, what was going on with his own politicians, his own command people, and have all the staff he needed to be, was northward. They didn't even send Vice Admiral Derek Raffel down south, because one of the reasons, although I consider it a very bad reason, was because they weren't sure they'd have the space to support his team and actually allow him to be a task force commander down south and then have fleet command given to Fieldhouse. So they made Fieldhouse the task force commander as well as the fleet commander for doing the operation. For running Operation Corporate, which was the mission to recover the Falkland Islands. He did it all from the UK. And you can argue the fors and against of the situation, but one of the things you can't argue with that is that he at many points has the most accurate information about everything that's going on. And he's doing his role. At every single level, as you go more senior as an admiral, your concept, your scope of operations expands. A battle group commander is talking about their battle group in the world. A task force commander is dealing with multiple battle groups, how they interact, how their ships interact internally, and how the world interacts with a task force. A fleet commander these days could well be looking at the entire world and operations that span the globe. They are having to visualize in their head the work of not just their own ships, but potentially thousands of other ships the worldwide. And they have to do that all in their head. And yes, you can go, well, we can put up a visual a visual representation of it, so they don't have to imagine it in their head. But they do. Because you can give them a nice representation of them, but that doesn't show you what diplomatic interactions they might achieve. They have to imagine that out in their head, and work that out in their head. The options, and listen to them, and put together the information for all the different staff officers together in their head and work it out. I did some videos recently about Starfleet Command and why the admirals in Starfleet really wind me up, because they never seem to have a proper staff and proper command structure. They never seem to be acting as they're supposed to. And the thing is, even when people comment, oh, well, they'll be assisted by AI, I sit there and go, the sheer amount of information, decisions which have to be made, as part of being an admiral and have to be enacted and checked they're being enacted, no matter how smart the AI is, you are going to have to need a whole lot of officers in that process. You're going to need a whole lot of people within that process who the Admiral is going to have to command. Because the Admiral is setting the culture, the expectations of the entire force. The Admiral is overseeing leaders of leaders. And they are trying to deliver effect, policy as desired by their government, with instruments which can be both sledgehammers and scalpels in the same day, in the same time, depending on how they're being used. The more flexible you make an asset, the more difficult it is to work out how to deploy it, honestly, because you have such a range of options. And it can be very tempting to go for the easiest option, which might be the sledgehammer, or the option which is the least risky option, which is the scalpel. But those might not be the right options to go with, and you as an admiral have got to make that decision. And you've got to explain it to the people above you and the people below you why they're doing it. And lead them through it. While keeping an understanding of everything else that's going on around you. It's a tough job. It truly is. With that being said, I've already given you the question, so I'm going to leave it as the question I asked earlier. But what have we got coming up? Well, there's some fun coming up. This week is Emperor Pertinax. And I'm going to be slowly getting on with all the Saturday videos. They're going to be roughly 2 weeks behind rather than 1 week behind as they normally were. But, you know, hopefully that's good. Hopefully that allows for some evolution. Maybe it even allows... Maybe I get enough money in time coming into my account, because I get a paycheck sometime, that all the videos next week get recorded on the new PC. I'm going to go with that option. I think that's the least potentially blaspheming, to just cross my fingers and hope for that one, but we'll do that. Thank you again for your support. Thank you again for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, share, and subscribe if you did, and please remember the really important thing for content creators, that bell. If you can pick yourself what you get shown, rather than letting YouTube decide based on their algorithm from what you see, that really does help. Because I do love it. The VTubing sphere has this great phrase. They call them your Oshis. They are the people you push. And it's basically a good way to describe a content creator, because if you subscribe and you're supporting, you're pushing them, that helps them reach others. That watching those videos, sharing those videos on social media, discussing what they're doing with others to get more people to watch them, that pushing really does help them grow, because they don't grow due to the algorithm. They don't grow due to luck. They grow due to you and your support and your kindness. So I do like that phrase from VTubing. You have an Oshi who you push. That's basically what it means. And it's a cool one. And yes, for those who are wondering about me knowing about VTubers and all these things, as I've said in other videos, I have a mother who's a massive fan, and because she watches a lot of them, I've watched them as well. And honestly, some of them are pretty cool gamers who've taught this old historian a few tricks of how to win some interesting games.
And some are just spectacular singers, and frankly, you're just sort of sitting there going, this is a concert. But anyway, that's completely off the topic. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care.